Have you ever heard a story so buried in history, you start wondering if someone wanted it forgotten? This one begins with a man named Ezekiel Cross, a man who had lost everything to a group that called themselves the Brethren of the Harvest. They claimed to be men of power, wealth, and faith. But behind closed doors, what they worshipped was control. She was born into privilege and imprisoned by it. He was born in chains and chose vengeance over survival. When their paths crossed in 1841, the South's cruelest secret began to unravel. One night, one body, one burning house at a time. By winter's end, nothing remained of Cypress Grove but ash, and a legend whispered in fear. She was his to save, and his to destroy. Let's uncover this historical mystery this night. In April of 1841, a man named Silas Rutledge made an announcement that stopped even the most ruthless plantation owners in their tracks. He wasn't selling land. He wasn't freeing anyone. He was doing something no white man in South Carolina had ever dared. He placed his own daughter, Catherine, a 28-year-old woman weighing over 260 pounds, under the complete authority of an enslaved man named Ezekiel Cross, not as a caretaker, not as a servant, as her master. The wealthy families of Colleton County were scandalized, but none of them knew what was really happening behind the locked doors of Cypress Grove Plantation. By November, 13 men were dead, the plantation was ash, and Catherine's body had changed in ways no one could explain. So what really happened between the plantation owner's daughter and the man she was forced to obey? And why did everyone who witnessed it end up terrified? Before we uncover the truth, make sure you hit subscribe, tap that bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story gets darker than you think. Spring in Colleton County was suffocating, thick, humid air that clung to your skin. The Combe River drifted lazily through the low country, black water reflecting the hanging moss like funeral veils. All around it, miles of flooded rice fields, hundreds of enslaved people working knee-deep from dawn till dark. It was wealth built from pain, luxury carved out of human suffering. And Silas Rutledge had built his fortune right in the middle of it. He owned 58 enslaved people, not enough to make him one of the county's elite, but enough to buy him invitations to their tables. The real power families owned hundreds. Their children went north to college. Their names could ruin a man with a whisper. Silas wanted that kind of power more than anything, and he'd do anything to get it. His wife, Elizabeth, had died giving birth to Catherine back in 1813. He raised his daughter alone, obsessed with business, reputation, and control. He was a tall man, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind people described as honorable, until they really got to know him. Catherine, meanwhile, grew up trapped in that house, educated but isolated, medicated for female hysteria, and treated like a burden. By 28, she could barely walk, weighed over 260 pounds, and was constantly dosed with mercury and laudanum, the cures doctors swore would calm her nerves. What they were really doing was killing her slowly. Then came the letter. April 7, 1841, delivered by private courier. 3 pages sealed with a red wax symbol, a scythe crossed with wheat stalks. Silas knew it instantly. The mark of the Brethren of the Harvest. 13 men who met in secret, mixing old European blood rites with stolen African rituals. They believed blood fed the land, and that power belonged only to those willing to take it. Silas had been one of them for nearly 20 years. Now they were calling in a debt. $12,000 in losses, an impossible amount. But the letter offered another way to pay. A demonstration of loyalty. He was to take his daughter and hand her completely to one of his enslaved men. Not as punishment, as property, for an entire year, in public. The humiliation would destroy his family's name, but it would save his fortune. And Silas Rutledge, true to his nature, chose money over mercy. He signed before dawn. 3 days later, another letter arrived. A name, Ezekiel Cross, age 33, born in Virginia, skilled in carpentry and herbal medicine. Temperament, quiet and obedient. What the letter didn't say was that Ezekiel had been chosen on purpose, and that he had his own reasons for being there. April 13th, the wagon rolled up to the main house. Silas stepped outside to meet him, and froze. Ezekiel didn't bow his head like most. He looked straight at Silas, calm, steady, unnerving. He was tall, 6'2", strong, with the kind of quiet presence that made people nervous without knowing why. The deal was made. Ezekiel was led to a small cabin near the house, separate from everyone else. When he was finally alone, he reached inside his shirt and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Inside, a piece of paper with 3 names written in a child's handwriting: Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, his wife. His son, his daughter, sold away from him 3 years earlier by Silas Rutledge, all 3 dead within 2 years, not for money, not for necessity, but to prove his loyalty to the brethren by showing he could destroy a family without flinching. Ezekiel had spent 2 years tracking him, working plantation to plantation, waiting for a chance like this. Now, he was inside the house, and vengeance had finally come home. April 14th, his first day. A house slave named Judith brought him upstairs to Catherine's room. She warned him softly, "Bad day. She doesn't take kindly to strangers." From inside came the sound of shattering glass. Catherine shouted, "I said no more doctors. Get out!" Judith hesitated, but Ezekiel stepped in alone. The room was dark, curtains drawn, heavy air thick with the smell of mercury and decay. Catherine sat by the cold fireplace, pale, trembling, her eyes distant and wild. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm not a doctor," Ezekiel said quietly. "Your father asked me to help." "Help?" She laughed bitterly. "That's what they all say before they poison me." He didn't move closer. He just asked, "What are you supposed to forget, Miss Catherine?" That stopped her. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know?" "I know nothing," he said simply. "Only that your father says you're unwell." She studied him, really looked at him, and something in her expression softened. "You're not from here?" she said. "No." "Ma'am, Virginia," then she whispered, almost to herself. "Do you know what happens in this house?" "What they do in the cellar?" Ezekiel's pulse quickened, but his face stayed still. "I don't, miss." "You will." Then silence, until he said quietly, "What if your doctors are wrong? What if your father's been the one poisoning you all this time to keep you silent?" That sentence changed everything. Her eyes cleared for the first time in years. She stared at him and whispered, "He told you." "He told me nothing," Ezekiel said. "But I know what mercury does, what laudanum does. I've seen it before." "Why would you say that?" "Because I've seen your father destroy people for less, and I want him to suffer for what he did, to me, to others, and to you." He told her about Sarah, Benjamin, and Ruth, how Silas had sold them, how they died. Catherine listened, trembling. "The brethren," she whispered. "He sold them for the brethren." Ezekiel looked at her sharply. "You know about them?" She laughed, bitter, broken laughter. "Everyone in this house learns sooner or later." Then her eyes hardened. "If I let you help me, what happens then?" "You get well," he said. "And when you're strong again, we decide what comes next." She leaned forward, voice shaking. "Then know this. I want them all dead. My father, the judge, the reverend, every man who met in that cellar. I want them to beg before they die." Ezekiel nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other." "Good," she said. "But one more thing. When it's over, you'll help me die too." He hesitated, then nodded. "Agreed." And so their dark alliance began. Over the next weeks, Ezekiel began to wean her off the poisons. Less laudanum, more herbs, valerian for the shakes, chamomile for sleep, milk thistle to cleanse her body. The withdrawals were brutal. Fever, vomiting, trembling, but he never left her side. By the end of the week, Catherine could stand, then walk, then speak clearly for the first time in years. They talked for hours each night. She told him what she'd seen at 12, the cellar, the rituals, the blood, the screams. He told her what Silas had done to his family, 2 broken souls, one born into privilege, the other into chains and bound by a single purpose, vengeance. By April 29th, Silas had planned a grand dinner. 41 guests from the county's most powerful families. The invitation said, "A family announcement." When everyone was seated, the judge, the reverend, the banker, Catherine sat beside her father, calm and silent. The room buzzed with speculation. No one could have imagined what was about to unfold, and before the year was over, Cypress Grove would burn. 13 men would be dead. and the name Rutland would vanish from history, whispered only in fear. So what really happened after that dinner? And what did Ezekiel Cross do that made the survivors swear never to speak again? Imagine a room full of the county's richest men, judges, preachers, bankers, talking like nothing could touch them. Now imagine one of the servants listening to every word, invisible, and counting. What he heard that night would change everything. Ezekiel Cross moving through the dining room like a shadow, clearing plates, topping off glasses, doing the job he'd been trained to do. No one looked twice. No one expected him to understand anything. But he heard it all. After dessert, Silas Rutland rose, glass in hand. He gave the polite thanks, then dropped the bomb. "My friends," he said, "you know Catherine's been unwell for years. We tried doctors, specialists from Charleston and Philadelphia. Nothing worked, until recently." He nodded toward Ezekiel. 2 weeks ago, I brought Ezekiel in. He's helped her. She's better, murmurs. Heads tilted. Some thought it a miracle, others a curiosity. Catherine sat beside her father, composed. But Ezekiel saw her fingers clench white around her napkin under the table. He saw that flash in her eyes, the silent promise of violence. Silas didn't stop there. "Because of this improvement," he continued, "I've decided something difficult. Ezekiel will take full responsibility for Catherine's care. He'll have authority over her daily life, treatment, and where she lives, effective immediately." You could feel the room change. Shock, outrage disguised as whispers. Mrs. Pelham's jaw tightened. Marcus Fanning blurted, "Silas, what are you doing?" "You can't place your daughter under a slave's control permanently." Silas shrugged. "I'm placing her with someone who succeeded where doctors failed. My daughter's health matters more than pride." Reverend Crenshaw tried the polite angle. A companion, a nurse. Silas was done. He turned to Catherine. "Do you agree?" The whole room held its breath. She could have refused, exposed everything, brought down the house. Instead, she gave the smallest, perfectly measured smile. "I trust my father," she said. "Ezekiel's been kind. I am content." The performance was flawless, but Ezekiel saw the truth beneath it. The pale hand crushing linen, the eyes promising something else. She was acting the broken daughter. Inside, she burned. That night, the guests trickled away. The manor emptied. Catherine retired, Silas to his study. Ezekiel cleaned quietly, then knocked on Catherine's door. She sat by the window in her dinner dress, staring into the dark. "It's official," she said. "I'm his responsibility. Property of property." "How absurd. Are you all right?" he asked. "I want to burn this house, with everyone inside, calm, deadly." "We'll be patient," he reminded her. "That's the plan, right?" She moved to her dresser and opened a wooden box, papers tucked inside. "I've been writing everything down," she said. Dates, names, ritual details disguised so if anyone finds them they'll look like nonsense. "But I can decode it." She pulled out one page. "They keep a ledger. The Brethren keeps records, names, dates, who did what. It's in the cellar past the main chamber. That's where they keep what they can't afford to lose." Ezekiel felt the room tilt. If that ledger existed, if it held what she claimed, it would destroy them. But it also meant going into the heart of the Brethren's darkness. They had 2 weeks. Silas would be away in Charleston from May 14th to the 16th. They planned around those days. They spent the next hours whispering maps, schedules, keys, guard patterns. Catherine sketched the cellar layout from memory. Ezekiel counted the risks and chose to believe her. He read the paper with the 3 names one more time by candlelight. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth, the family Silas had sold away. He slept with their names in his head. 2 weeks passed in a calm that felt like a held breath. Catherine eased under Ezekiel's care. Food changed, laudanum tapered, herbs introduced. Withdrawal was brutal. She vomited, shook, burned with fever. Ezekiel stayed. When she recovered, she walked. She read. She translated journal pages for him, filling in details about a network of men who met across the South, Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, all variations on the same rotten theme. Wealthy men who cloaked themselves in ritual and called it power. May 14th arrived. Silas left early. They waited until the house slept. At 10, they slipped to the kitchen, found the disguised panel behind the pantry, and pushed. The stair dropped into damp, cold air. The smell hit them. Earth, old smoke, something rotted and chemical. Down they went. Lantern light was small and careful. The cellar was larger than Ezekiel expected. A 30-foot square room with a heavy table stained dark, jars sealed with wax, racks of black robes with crimson trim. Shelves lined one wall with books and papers. Catherine moved like someone who had memorized every corner. She pressed a stone. A section swung open, revealing a smaller chamber, and there it was. The ledger, a massive volume on a stand, thick parchment, dark leather, metal clasps. Names, dates, ritual descriptions written clinical, almost proud. Ezekiel's hands trembled as he turned to the entries. Rituals every 6 weeks, tied to planting cycles, killings, sacrifices. A litany of victims, enslaved people, poor whites, indigenous people. The vulnerable taken and never seen again. Notes about consumption. The brethren didn't just kill. They recorded and, in some cases, ate what they took. Convinced blood fed the land. Ezekiel found 3 lines that crushed him. October 1838, purchased family unit from Virginia. Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. Separated the father to demonstrate resolve. Sent to Alabama. Payment received. They worked quickly, but not recklessly. Catherine insisted they copy the most damning entries first, not take the whole ledger and be discovered. They copied by candlelight, ink scritching, hearts pounding. Page after page. Names, dates, signatures, evidence. They didn't hear the door open. Light flared in the outer chamber and voices moved like knives. Silas stood framed in the doorway, flanked by men. Calm, controlled. "I'm impressed," he said. "I didn't think you'd find the inner room." Catherine stepped in front of Ezekiel without thought. "You were supposed to be in Charleston," she said. "I returned early," Silas replied. "I watched the house all evening." He wasn't surprised. He never was. They were surrounded. 7 men, one against many. Silas's men hauled them upstairs and threw them in his study, a locked windowless room. The 3 of them trapped in the dark, the house alive with footsteps and the murmurs of calling men. Catherine pressed the copied papers into Ezekiel's hands. "I kept these," she whispered. "I slipped them past the searcher." He clutched them like a prayer. But prayers in that house were dangerous things. They heard voices gather, then doors open again. Marcus Fanning's face grave. "They're ready. Come peacefully, and you won't be harmed." They were marched back to the cellar, only this time the chamber had been staged. 13 men in ritual robes, candles in every holder, crimson cloth on the altar, a circle of chairs. Silas at the head. "My daughter discovered our inner chamber," Silas told them. "They were copying our ledger. We have a crisis." Judge Pelam's voice sliced through. "They must be silenced permanently." Silas raised a hand. "Not so fast. Catherine is my blood. I won't dispose of her without thinking." But the man, the enslaved man, he presents an opportunity. He turned to Ezekiel and made an obscene offer. "Join us." "Not as an equal. As an associate, given tasks and access. Help us when required. In return, I will give you what you seek, vengeance against others who harmed your family. I can give you money and information to destroy Edward Gaines, the Alabama owner who worked your family to death. Or refuse, and both you and the girl die tonight, disposed in the swamp, the papers burned, the ledger intact. It was venom dressed as choice." Ezekiel looked at Catherine. Her eyes told him to refuse. Do not become them. But Ezekiel thought of Sarah, Benjamin, Ruth. He thought of getting inside their order to gather more proof, to buy time to destroy them from within. He bargained. "I'll join on one condition. Catherine goes free. Not back upstairs. She leaves South Carolina. New name, money to live on. Never return." The brethren grumbled. Judge Pelham, pragmatic, spoke. "The girl is broken. But the man's willingness to join proves our reach." Silas considered. Finally he agreed. Catherine would be sent to Philadelphia. Ezekiel's initiation would happen 3 weeks later. Until then, he stayed at Cypress Grove, watched like a prize animal. At dawn, a closed carriage rolled away with Catherine inside. Ezekiel watched from his cabin window as the trees swallowed it. He never spoke to her again before departure. She had not been allowed to say goodbye. But when she'd been led back the night before, she'd looked at him once, the look that said this wasn't surrender. It was survival, strategy. The next 3 weeks were a slow, marred torture. 2 overseers shadowed Ezekiel everywhere. He could not leave the grounds. Every moment was a test. He had joined the enemy to destroy them, or so he promised himself. The ledger's copies lay hidden. The risk of everything falling apart was a single misstep away. So he agreed to join the men who killed his family. She was sent away under a new name. The ledger was copied, but the ledger remained in that cellar. The brethren thought the matter settled. They were wrong. What happened next? The initiation, the betrayals, and the fire that would reduce Cypress Grove to ash. That's the part you don't want to miss. They gave Ezekiel meaningless work, cleaning tools, carrying wood, keeping him close but under watch. He acted obedient, quiet, broken. But he wasn't. Every day he watched, listened. He learned who could be trusted, which guards were cruel, when the masters met in secret. He was building something in silence, a plan, because in that house, revenge was the only thing still alive inside him. Then came June 2nd, the night before Ezekiel's initiation. Silas came to his cabin, alone, past midnight. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll join us. You'll understand what real power means." He told Ezekiel about the brethren, how they'd ruled in secret for 43 years, how they protected each other by sharing guilt, by doing terrible things together, so none could ever expose the others. "Everyone's equally guilty," Silas said. "That's why no one talks." Then the offer: join them. Take power. Use it to improve things from within. But Ezekiel knew the truth. That was the trap. The moment he joined, he'd be one of them. Corrupted forever. Then Silas added one more thing. If you refuse tomorrow, you die, and Catherine dies with you. Don't bother pretending she's in Philadelphia. We know she's hiding. And if you fail, she's gone. Ezekiel froze. Catherine was alive, but in danger. That night he sat in the dark, staring at the names of his murdered family, and whispered, "Forgive me for what I have to become." June 3rd, midnight. The cellar beneath Cypress Grove glowed with candlelight. 13 men stood in robes. Silas at the altar. Ezekiel, shirtless, hands tied, was dragged before them. "Brothers," Silas said, "tonight we bring into our circle a man who once hated us, to prove that our power conquers all." Then they brought out the test. A young enslaved woman, bound, gagged, terrified. "Take the knife," Silas ordered. "Make the first cut. Refuse and you die. Accept and you rise among us." The chanting started. The shadows danced. Ezekiel's heart pounded. He looked at the knife, at the girl, at Silas, and then he made his choice. The knife flashed, but not toward the girl. He turned and drove it into the throat of the nearest brethren member. Blood sprayed. Screams echoed. In seconds the room exploded into chaos. Ezekiel tore the robe off a dying man, smothered the candles, plunged the chamber into darkness. He moved like fury itself, striking, breaking, destroying. He cut the girl free. "Run," he shouted. "Run!" She fled. He stood his ground. Silas stared at him through the smoke. "You've doomed yourself," Silas hissed. "And Catherine." "Maybe," Ezekiel said. But not alone. What Silas didn't know was that Catherine had already returned. She'd never gone north for 3 weeks. She'd been hiding among the enslaved quarters, gathering allies, spreading whispers, preparing for this exact moment. And when the girl came screaming from the cellar, she knew. It was time. 23 enslaved men and women followed her back into that house, armed with axes, hammers, and fury that had been building for generations. What followed wasn't a fight. It was reckoning. No one escaped. No one was spared. Every man who'd ever treated others as less than human finally met the consequence of that belief. When it was done, Catherine and Ezekiel stood in the blood-soaked cellar. "What now?" Ezekiel asked. "Now we burn it all," Catherine said. They knew the truth could never go public. If anyone found out, the other brethren across the south would hunt them down. So they made it look like an accident. They poured oil, stacked wood, and set the place ablaze. Before leaving, Ezekiel tore out the pages about his family from the brethren's ledger. "So they won't be forgotten," he said. Then, as flames consumed Cypress Grove, they walked away, in opposite directions. Catherine toward Charleston, Ezekiel toward the frontier. They never saw each other again. The official story: a fire during a business meeting. 13 men, including Silas Rutledge, trapped in the cellar. A tragic accident. Catherine, declared dead in the blaze. Ezekiel, sold to another plantation, though no record of that sale exists. The truth lived only in whispers, stories told late at night about the plantation where the masters burned, about the man and woman who made justice real, even if no one could speak of it. Decades passed. The war came and went. Cypress Grove was rebuilt, then forgotten. But in 1971, during demolition, workers found something, a journal, sealed inside a wall. Names, dates, rituals, everything. It was written in code. And before historians could decode it, it vanished, destroyed, hidden, protected by the descendants of the Brethren. No one knows. Here's what we do know. 13 powerful men died in that fire. A woman vanished. An enslaved man disappeared. And somewhere, maybe the truth still waits, written in that journal, waiting to be found. Because power built on cruelty always collapses eventually. And history, it never stays buried forever. Do you think that journal still exists somewhere? Or was it destroyed to keep the secret of Cypress Grove dead forever? Let me know what you think in the comments. If this story gave you chills, hit like, share it with someone who loves dark history, and subscribe for more forgotten mysteries that blur the line between history and horror, because some stories refuse to stay buried.